the thing I love about talking about masculinity with men who are even a little bit curious is that the map is known, right? Uh, we can look at we can go back to the Odyssey, Homer's Odyssey. You can see all these deep structure, archetypal patterns of masculinity. Star Wars, Lord of the Rings. The list goes on and on and on. Look at any action movie
Exactly.
where there's a male lead character. He's playing the hero role. Now, the hero role, from my perspective and my studies, is what we would call pathologically adolescent. So it's the pinnacle of the adolescent stage of development in the male, and it has a complementary version in the female and the feminine, but we're talking about men. So let's stick with this hero role, where it is about conquest. What you're talking about is the stage which is necessary, where we kind of hone our horns, where we kind of want to go out and we want to kind of flex our muscles, and we want to find our limits.
Right.
When you work with youth, there are going to be three questions they're asking the first time they meet you before they trust you or they give you their trust. They're going to walk into the room and they're going to go, who's in charge? Not who's holding the space, but who's really top dog around here? Who's the alpha male? What are the rules? Like what are the limits that are agreed here in this group? And what's going to happen to me when I break them?
Powerful.
So that's what's going on, and it's mostly unconscious. We don't do that. We're not really aware of that's what's going on. But ultimately, in the deepest place inside of us as men, we want to feel we belong. We want this sense of tribe and safety and brotherhood,
Right.
and that we've got people around us and alongside us.
Yeah.
And what modern culture does is it puts us against each other,
Yes.
and it creates conflict, which creates division, and there's not that there's anything wrong with conflict per se, but there's not the room for healthy conflict.
Yeah.
And where there isn't room for conflict, I think Martin Prechtel says, where there isn't room for conflict, there will be violence.
Yeah.
So if we don't learn to feel the goodness, this kind of rich sense of being empowered, which gives us a profound sense of security and our own kind of inner roots, we're insecure. And when we're insecure, we don't like to make eye contact with other men, because that actually, in the amygdala, in this kind of deep primal brain, I mean, you're talking about having sex with women in that kind of like violent, let's get it on kind of way.
Exactly.
That is primal. That is
Yeah.
animalistic, because that's the part of the brain that's doing it. It's pure survival instinct for the species.
Yeah.
It's a part of it. It is layered, but if we stay there, we never get to really fully explore the breadth and the depth of the true potential of the masculine.
Yeah.
So, how do we make spaces for young men and older men to come into relationship across generations? I mean, it's a profoundly difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
You and I are fortunate. We are so blessed to be here and to be even able to understand some of the conversation that we're having.
Yeah.
It's not common parlance in our culture.
No.
Common parlance is what you see on TV.
Yeah.
It's like, you've got to be a hero. If you're not doing this, then you're not a man. You've got to man up, which means stuff your emotions down.
Exactly.
Don't be vulnerable. Vulnerability for me is, you may as well talk about courage.
Truth.
Vulnerability isn't weakness.
No.
Vulnerability is a decision to step into an environment or a context where you're not in control.
Right.
And and what for? Well, for two things. You might learn something about yourself, and you might actually have a relationship rather than a farce, that's kind of basically a fearful kind of exchange and being timid and not really being who you really are.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and also not being able to be given the space to explore who you really are, like you said earlier. And I think there's a beautiful saying, and I know Brené Brown speaks beautifully about vulnerability. She's somebody that's opened me up to vulnerability, but also, even as I am now, I'm vulnerable in being in this path, in this conversation, in this path that I'm on. I'm vulnerable in, for example, in my own intimacy, and intimacy for me is into me I see. You may have heard of that one before, on the path, but for people watching, it's like, into me I see. It's like I can't have true intimacy if I'm not willing to look inside of me first and do the work that's required, and do the cleaning and the pruning and the gardening that's required inside of me. And I think what I'd love to go, I know you mentioned Martin Prechow, who talks beautifully on grief, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
And I've come across a little bit of his work, and I want to explore him further, and I love what he talked about grief. But I love what you just said there, and I think I'd like you just to dive a bit deeper there for me, or just to break that down, because I think for men listening, or whatever man comes to this, or woman of course, but whatever man comes to this conversation, this safe space for conflict, and you said about Martin Prechow mentions that we need to create space for conflict, because at the moment what we're seeing, or what I'm seeing, is I'm seeing unconscious conflict going on, from the space that you said, separation, we're an individual self, it's dog eat dog, man against the rest of the world, I can't cry, I've got to watch my back, hold up, somebody's out to get me, there it's take, it's not what can I give, it's what can I get. And it's just like, it's basically so much confusion, and I feel there's such a tight thread, a thin thread at the moment, and tight probably, Paul, that, like you said, when we talk about humanity's evolution, because let's look at this on a real, I like to look at things on a real global scale, right? Okay, the planet may continue to live on, but as a species die out all the time, hundreds of them a day, if not thousands. And we are ultimately a species, right, on many levels. And I know that we're also more than that when we start to look at our multidimensional selves, and that's maybe another layer of conversation. But as a physical being here, as we interact with life and the planet and all around us, I'm noticing a real sort of confusion and vulnerability, although it might not be able to be spoken on by many men from that place, but really almost like, maybe you can help me with this, Paul, but like a holding on, but not really knowing what we're even holding on to. Does that make sense? I don't know if that resonates. So like it feels like men need to sort of get themselves out of the way so that we can actually go, oh shit, man, okay, we've done some stuff, but now let's sort of let's retract, let's reform, let's regroup, and let's start again.
Yeah. Okay. So in my time working with large groups of men, I set up a non-profit in the UK that was designed to mentor groups of men in communities to be confident that they could mentor young men in their communities, not as a kind of a social services kind of thing, but just men who cared and wanted to contribute to the kind of the healthy evolution of young men in their communities. One thing that's really important that we haven't mentioned around this topic of initiation is